I love that song. And I love dancing. So we all danced here in the room. And in that spirit, I wanted to re-invite all the ancestors or those we were contemplating to join us in our circle, and anyone else that we would like to call in. And it said that, who knows, but I'm going to continue to quote a traditional saying that whenever there was a Dharma talk being given in any of the worlds, the divine abodes or this earthly realm, all the devas would come and listen because Dharma talks were so rare. So, hi devas. And it might be that there have been times when you think, wow, there must be some energy that's helping me live this life. So I think I've mentioned many years ago, I was on a vision quest and I went a little sick. I had a bit of a fever, but I didn't want to miss it. And we were supposed to go and find our place and then come back and tell the guide where our place was. That was like one of the agreements for emergency reasons. And I found myself in this forest and I just could not find a good place. I kept walking and walking and walking, and I didn't take any water with me because I hadn't thought through that I should. And after a number of hours, maybe 4 hours, I was way past the time. We were supposed to take 2 hours max. So maybe it was 4 hours or even 5 hours. I was like, I am way lost. There's no water. I have a fever. And I'm really ... And so I sat, I was sitting by a river, which there was no river where we were. So I was a long way from base camp. And like, wow, I could die. Like I really got it, I could die. And a moment after that realization, there was this voice that came through, and it was like, girl, get yourself off this rock and go in this direction, which felt like totally the wrong direction. But I listened to it. I got up, and it was very clear when, and I had to take off my shoes, so I had to walk barefoot. And it was clear at just some energetic feeling on my feet when I was going the wrong way, and then I would reorient. And maybe I walked about an hour or 1.5 hours that way until I could hear traffic. And I came upon a cabin and I knocked on the door because I didn't even care at this point. I said, I'm really lost and could I have a glass of water? And they brought me a glass of water, and anyway, I won't go on with the rest of the story, but that's an example of sometimes having that experience that there's guiding help some of the time. So this is for the devas who give us guiding help even when we don't recognize they're there. May they and all beings that would benefit from the Dharma come in some way to hear the Dharma, right? Yeah. It's a theme that that some of you have shared with me, not a theme of practice, that some of you have shared with me so beautifully, and that I also speak to and practice, which is the balance of holding our grief and holding our loneliness and isolation and suffering and sorrow and tears. In as much presence and love as we can, and then also intentionally moving towards cultivating joy, being creative, dancing, singing, sharing metta, practicing metta, all the things that actually balance that. And I know that it's sometimes it seems so like Anne of Green Gables. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, let me just see always all what's good. And at least for me, sometimes that's nauseating. And so it feels so important to acknowledge both realities at the same time. That we both, and we're doing it already so beautifully, sharing and holding together our journeys. And that the safer we feel, or the more willing we are to undefend ourselves and to be open about what's happening, the more we're giving each other the gift of being able to hold each other. And in that description of ignorance I gave in that Dharma talk, and that there's that confusion about not knowing where the path is, and then there were these two mental qualities, shamelessness and blamelessness. I didn't mention that when there's ignorance, there is shame and blame. Those descriptions were another way to say there's shame and blame that are always somehow are associated with the qualities that bring suffering. And we've often experienced that is when we feel a tremendous amount of suffering or grief or dissociation, it's very difficult not to judge ourselves for it, or to think that in some way we're deficient, or that there's something wrong with what's happening, that these experiences are arising. And that is the complex of ignorance, because we know when we hear someone else, someone here in this room, sharing their grief or their pain or their shame, we feel honored, right? We feel honored to witness that sharing and to say, I'm here to hold that with you. And so this movement towards Sangha is such a leap of faith to move out of the conditioning of ignorance, where we feel ashamed about talking about ourselves. And even, in some way, even the trauma, and I have shared quite in detail some of the trauma I've experienced, and then I've got some feedback from quite a few people saying, don't. It's too hard for me to hear it. It's too triggering. So there is that side too of wanting to check in with people. Like they say in Democracy Now, this video I'm going to show you is upsetting. So basically I'm giving you the choice about whether you see it or not. But in a Dharma talk, you can't really say that. All that is to say that it's so important to me to model as much as I can without triggering my own experiences, because they're part of all our experiences. And there's some of us who have been more blessed than others, coming from families where there wasn't a lot of violence or alcoholism or denial or abandonment, or all the things that, or parents who weren't able to protect us from police states or poverty, or all the different things that we carry, even if it isn't personal. Even if we could say, no, this part I didn't carry personally, still, because we're so sensitive human beings, where just a touch of a fly, that little insect, or a butterfly, or a little something even smaller like a no-see-um, we feel that on our skin. We're so sensitive, and we can say something and whoosh, it's like a huge volcanic reaction of one thing or another, shame or blame or anger or whatever it is. That's how sensitive we are. And so of course we're carrying so much. And the deepest signifier of oppression is to silence that reality and to blame us for being alive and feeling it. Yeah, it's what you were saying about capitalism in our sharing today. So that is one of the invitations that we have when we come together in community. In this community and in other communities, in other sanghas and in other relationships, our willingness to undefend our hearts and become vulnerable so that we can allow ourselves to be held, because that's what we're so wanting, is that kind of holding, that deep holding. So then also for all our mothers, for all our mothers and for us as mothers, for how imperfect they were and perhaps how imperfect we have been, and for all the ways that in this culture of wounding we have managed to love. And maybe that love got a little better as we got older and deeper in the Dharma. Holding that, our mothers and our mothering, and our mothering for each other and ourselves. How beautiful that is, and also imperfect, right? The both and. So in the naming of the sorrow and the grief and the wounding that we are being called to hold through the development of the beautiful qualities, the liberating qualities, we also then feel the calling to practice joy, because it is, and not to bore you like I'm a broken record, it is impossible to hold our sorrow without cultivating our joy. And so I wanted to talk about cultivating joy, one of those talks that I almost always give, as a Dharma talk for this very reason in some traditional ways. But first I wanted to read, because this was so, if I'm a little disorganized tonight. Where was it? Hang on a moment. Oh, here. I wanted to read this from Bishop Tutu, because Bishop Tutu, I think some of you know that Bishop Tutu and Mandela and a lot, Walter Sisulu and Robert Sobukwe, a lot of the leaders in the ANC freedom struggle were I grew up with, because they were all part of the organizing that was happening in the house that I grew up in. And Bishop Tutu, out of everyone, touched me most, was always tuned in to me and had a wonderful word and could tell that I was really struggling myself. So I have a great deal of, he is one of my ancestors, Bishop Tutu, that I call on. And this is what he says: I draw my strength from prayer. Without prayer, life for me would be impossible. When I've not prayed, what I feel is almost physical, like not brushing my teeth. Prayer is totally indispensable to put me in touch with the transcendent, the omnipotent, the source of all life, love, and goodness. I depend too on the prayers of others, because I belong in a family, the human family. It is clear, therefore, that I try to let my prayer fill my entire life. My life is working out of my praying. That feels so beautiful to me, that difference between I love and love is living inside of me and expressing itself, or that I pray and then my life is an expression of prayer, imperfect always, but that core anchor into, I know what my life is, it's working out my prayer, or I know what my life is, it is working and embodying and calling in and strengthening the intention, which is like prayer, the prayer. And I pray a lot. I actually pray, Dharma ancestors, will you guide me? I feel so imperfect a vessel to communicate the depth of the liberation that is passed in this lineage. And I do it a lot, and sometimes all through the day. And sometimes when I'm sitting in front of you, I'm praying, may I be a vehicle for creating the conditions for liberation for both of us here, sitting in front of each other. So that extends to the cultivation of joy, that orientation over and over again for uplifting the heart, because praying brings joy, or intending and orienting towards that brings a beautiful joy. So joy might seem like something you do at Christmas time. I know you don't think that, but there's like this thing of joy is associated with particular situations, like joy at a birthday party, or joy at, well, I shouldn't say Christmas, because a celebration, joy for celebrations. in the Dharma, there are particular paths for cultivating joy, and one of the paths is one that I mentioned this morning, which is the development of concentration, or gathering ourselves. A profound joy arises the more the mind is gathered and quiet. And there's a whole sequence that happens in that process. A joy deepens and deepens into an equanimity that has lost the bubbliness of joy, but has the maturity of joy as a profound contentment and happiness. So that is one path, and then there is another path, which is the joy of mindfulness. That, I don't know about you, but there are times, right, when awareness knows a breath. And there's this, it's just that moment of purity of knowing, where in the connection with breath or sound or even a thought, there is this joy that comes. So the joy that comes from when mindfulness is strong and is, well, strong is a good enough word for that. The traditional expression is the maturity of mindfulness and awareness, or its purity. It's just mindfulness, just the knowing of the experience, and in that beautiful connection there is joy. And then there is joy in discerning the truth, the fundamental truths of our lives. The joy of knowing that we are a part of this great, unnameable mystery of life, of nature, of this universe, of the grandness of space that goes on for 1,000,000 light years, where it's like, what, 850,000 miles a second, like, and that's 1,000,000 light years of light. Is that what you say, 1,000,000 light years? Yeah, something like that. I mean, like, we're talking vast, vast, vast. And we're part of that. Like, wow, we're part of that. And so that when, and we know, because we felt this so many times, right, in particular parts of our lives, in nature or with music or in other creative endeavors, that sense of ourselves dissolving, the separateness of ourselves dissolving and becoming part of something that is our family, or is part of the largeness of that nature, love, art, creativity, dance. Dancing for me has been such a beautiful gateway of that this dissolution of separateness and just the movement to sound. Like that is such a beautiful gateway. How is it I don't dance that much? There you go. So the other way to say that is understanding we are not a solid, separate self. That's the traditional way of, when we understand that deeply, there is a profound and deep joy. We feel a profound and deep joy and released when we understand that the kind of search for perfection and control is inherently what's the word for never going to happen? That. It's never going to happen. It is inherently unsatisfactory. The conditions of our bodies, of our lives, and of relationships, of parenting, of children, of sickness, of a beautiful meal ending, of everything, it's inherently unsatisfactory. There is nothing perfect that will last. in this world. And when we grok it on a deep level, there's joy. It's like we're finally released for having to strive for something that is unobtainable. That was the word, unobtainable. It's unobtainable. And that ignorance of wanting the pleasure, wanting something to last, to anchor with, we finally give up and surrender. And oh my God, oh Buddha, I should say, or oh, not even Buddha, oh, mystery, source of mystery, amazing. So that brings me to like a story that I love to tell, because I hope in the telling of it, it brings me closer and closer to it. So Ruth was on a trip to Mexico with her husband. And she came from like a poor working class family in Germany, and she married her husband, Henry Dennison, whose family was a very wealthy family and owned a lot of the Santa Fe railway system eventually, that then diversified into whatever it was. Anyway, he had money. And she always felt like she wasn't accepted in that family. Nothing new, that feeling, right? And finally, after quite a few years of marriage, Henry gave her his grandmother's ring to wear. And it was very precious for Ruth, because it felt like it was finally her family giving Henry the ring to give to her as a sign of saying you're part of the family. And apparently it was a very beautiful ring with lots of precious stones in it. So she had her ring on, going on this train journey to Mexico. She had, in those days there were traveler's checks. Maybe you all was too young to remember, some of you, traveler's checks, but that's what we used when we were traveling years and years ago. And they were in a compartment, and Ruth was incredibly, not committed, always called to practice. And so she said to Henry, I'm going to practice walking meditation in what do you call it, when aisle, in the aisle on the train. But you know, there were compartments and then the aisle that went along the train. I'm going to practice walking meditation. Here's my bag with all the money and the traveler's checks and passports. And I think I'm going to take my ring off as well, because it feels a little too ostentatious right now to be wearing it. So she takes her ring off and puts it in the bag. And she goes outside and she starts practicing. Lifting, placing, shifting. Lifting, placing, shifting. And at some point she just gets this thing of, I should go back to the compartment. Henry is sleeping, and there is a man who had come into the compartment, clearly, with Ruth's bag, lifting up the window, and she saw him jump out of the train and roll on the ground and start running with her bag. And in that moment, she said, I gift you the bag so you don't have to live with the karma of stealing it. And she said in that moment, her heart and mind opened to the second stage of enlightenment. So, the joy of renunciation. There is an incredible and beautiful joy of renunciation. And that this practice of renunciation, of course we don't start with something as big as that, but we can practice it around little things. You know, like Yes, I would love to. This is me. Yes, I would love a new cashmere sweater. I love cashmere sweaters. Some of you know because you gift me some of your older cashmere sweaters, which I wear all the time. And so over time they shrink. And I think, oh, all my cashmere sweaters have got holes at this point and are shrinking. Maybe I should spend some money on buying a new cashmere sweater. And then I'm like, no, I am going to renounce that. And instead, I am going to give that money to prison radio. And so then, because I have given money to prison radio, then they send me all their, information. And every time I get something from prison radio, I feel happy. I'm like, yeah, I feel happy to support you. So that's one form of renunciation. There are many. It might be, something as simple as how we navigate temperature in the room. And some of us like it cold and some of us like it hot. And it's like, no, I can have it, at least not now, but in the morning I can have it open. I can deal with that, because I know some of us here like it a little cooler than I do. So just that willingness to stretch and to let go of always wanting it the way we want it, or always having, letting go of controlling, like especially driving in a car. I remember I would be like, why are you going this way? It's a long way, and it's, and my friend would say, well, it's much prettier. And I'd be like, Arinna, you can let go. So we'll be in the car longer, big deal. Like that, just ongoing renunciation that brings the spaciousness and joy and lightness of heart. That is actually one of the deepest practices that we're invited to. And then there are the traditional practices of cultivating joy. And so I'm going to read them. So the first is, well, I mentioned this already, the wise attention. And the second is remembering the virtues of the Buddha or other awakened beings. And the third is rejoicing in the Dharma. And the fourth is rejoicing in the virtues of the Sangha. The fifth is considering your own virtue. And the sixth is remembering your own generosity. Remember, Ian talked about that. The seventh is considering the virtues of the entities in the higher realms. And the eighth is reflecting on perfect peace. The ninth is avoiding persons overwhelmed with anger. And the 10th is reflecting on the teachings in the suttas. And the 11th is inclining the mind towards joy. So those are the 11 traditional practices for strengthening and bringing into being joy. And so I wanted to read the it's here, it's in this book. I wanted to read a little bit about the virtues of the Buddha. This Visuddhimagga is a compilation of the Buddha's teachings that were done 500 years after the Buddha's death. And it's the most, maybe it's like the Old Testament. It's like an amazing reference. Anyway, in it, are these recollections that I just talked about, and there is like 50 pages of recollecting the Buddha's qualities. So I'm only going to read a tiny amount of that, just like a paragraph, and I'm going to talk about speech, because speech is his speech, because speech is so difficult. But before I say this, I'll do this one maybe. I'm reading this because there are few beings who fully awakened. And a fully awakened being means that they have realized and fully brought to fruition a mind and a heart where there is no anger, greed, hatred, ignorance, delusion, envy, jealousy, none at all. Like it's burnt out, and that's the expression of it. It's all burnt out, and they're just the beautiful qualities expressing themselves. And then when you take those beautiful qualities that are expressing themselves and you spend eons, countless times, this is what the story says, that's when you become a Buddha, perfecting all those beautiful qualities, so to their fullest. That is a phenomenal recollection, to just think that a human being did this and how amazing it is. So I'm just going to read a couple. It's in traditional language, so you have to kind of, bear with the traditional language. So similarly, he is called blessed, the Buddha is called blessed, or possessed of abolishment, owing to the following menaces that have been abolished. For he has abolished all the 100,000 kinds of trouble, anxiety and defilement, classed as greed, as hate, as delusion, as misdirected attention, as consciencelessness and shamelessness, as anger and enmity, as contempt, as domineering, as envy and avarice, as deceit and fraud, as obduracy and presumption, as pride and haughtiness, as vanity and negligence, as craving and ignorance, as the three roots of the unprofitable kinds of misconduct and diversifications, as the four perseverances, cankers, tides, floods, bonds, bad ways, craving and clingings, as the 5 wildernesses in the heart, shackles in the heart, hindrances, and kinds of bondage, as the 6 roots of discord, as groups of craving, as the 7 inherent tendencies, as the 8 wrongnesses, as the 9 things rooted in craving, as the 10 courses of unprofitable action, as the 62 kinds of false view, as the 108 ways of behaving of craving, or in brief, all the obstructions and defilements of the aggregates. He has abolished all of this. He is free. Maybe that's enough of that. But just to, when we say the Buddha's name, it just cannot mean a lot, but it's way, way beautiful to acknowledge the reality of this human being, because he was a human being. And that then there are other teachers in the world, not so many, but there are, of the Dharma, who are fully awakened, who in their lives just exhibited unlimited compassion and wisdom. There's a story about Deepa Ma, who was a teacher of some of the teachers that are well known, like Joseph Goldstein and Sharon and Salzburg, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzburg, and Jack Cornfield. And she was born in Bangladesh and then ended up going to Burma, got married when she was 12 and ended up going to Burma. And I'm not going to say more about her life other than her husband died and 2 of her children died. And she was totally, absolutely heartbroken. And her doctor said, "You're dying, and maybe you should go and meditate because things, physically, you're not in very good health." And so she was so sick, she crawled up the steps of the meditation hall. And she accessed the meditation practice. She was so ready for it. She accessed the meditation practice, and over a year went through all the stages of awakening and fully awakened. And she was living in 2 rooms with, after this, with her 1 daughter that survived and her grandson. And when she moved into this apartment, it was like maybe 25 or 26, they didn't call it apartments, that's American, this 2-room space. They shared, a bathroom outside and anyway, there were maybe 25 or 26 of these spaces, and everyone, it was said, was like fighting each other, and it was like bad energy. And it said that after she moved in and she started talking to people and offering meditation instruction, that there was this huge change in the culture of this building. That actually some of the women who were there, because the stories about her neighbors was mostly around women, that are in a book about her, that they actually also went through deep stages of awakening while being moms and taking care of their families. And that's the power of a mind that is so pure, that it lifts up, it just lifts up the beautiful qualities. And so how lovely to actually actively find your place of reflecting and recollecting the amazing qualities of a human being. And it doesn't have to be the Buddha or even a Buddhist teacher. It can be whoever moves you through their courage, through their commitment to freedom, through the wisdom that they have called into being. And recollecting those beautiful qualities, resting on them, thinking about them, contemplating them, bringing them close to our hearts. Here is a human being who was able to do this. And can I, by thinking about them and appreciating them, can I come closer to that myself? Recollecting the virtues of awakened beings, or recollecting the virtues of the Buddha. If you really want to get into it, you can read the chapter in the Visuddhimagga, because it's amazing to think of a mind that is so free. And then recollecting the Dharma, that there is a practice, the practice of the Eightfold Path, and the amazing power of mindfulness. and thinking about it. Like, wow, it's amazing what it brings into being. The amazing power of love and of the other beautiful qualities. Contemplating those qualities and contemplating the practice of them. And then contemplating the virtues of the Sangha. And this is the practice that we've undertaken of the precepts, that we have committed with each other and to each other. I will not take your life. I will not steal from you. I will not cross boundaries, sexual boundaries in my life and with you. I will not lie. I will be truthful. I will speak appropriately and honestly and kindly and in a timely way. And I won't keep silence about things that need to be named. Like, we practice our multicultural agreements. Like, and then we have committed not to come to this room drunk or high, not taking mind-altering substances while we're in this kind of community together. That's the ground of healing. We're together building the ground of healing by taking these precepts together. And we can recollect that even when we feel like, God, I'm a terrible practitioner and I'm no good and I can't follow my breath and I'm all dissociated and nothing Arinna says it just says words and it doesn't make any difference. Then we can recollect, but I am giving a space where no one needs to be scared of me because I've committed not to harm by taking the precepts. Like, I don't know so much about the details of many of your families, but I do know from living in so much violence what an incredible gift that is. And joy comes from recollecting that. I am giving one of the greatest gifts I can give to another human being, the gift of safety and freedom from fear. And we get down on ourselves so much and we forget that profound gift. And even if it's for these 7 days and then 4 or 5 days, that's God. So I have all these scattered pages and things, and which of course I wanted to read to you, but I won't because it's time, and so it's time to come to closure. And may we take and bring to our hearts the possibilities that come from recollecting these qualities and bringing joy into our lives. And then I'll, let's see, what should I read? Okay, this is, well, it's not quite the poem I want to read, but I don't want to keep you any longer, so here we go. This is by Mark Nepo, and I've read this poem many times. we waste so much energy trying to cover up who we are, when beneath every attitude is the want to be loved, and beneath every anger is a wound to be healed, and beneath every sadness is the fear that there will not be enough time. When we hesitate in being direct, we when we hesitate in being direct, we unknowingly slip something on, some added layer of protection that keeps us from feeling the world. And often that thin covering is the beginning of a loneliness which, if not put down, diminishes our chances for joy. It's like wearing gloves every time we touch something and then forgetting we chose to put them on. We feel like nothing is quite real. In this way, our challenge each day is not to get dressed to face the world, but to unglove ourselves so that the doorknob feels cold, and the car handle feels wet, and the kiss goodbye feels like the lips of another being, soft and unrepeatable. Thank you. Thank you for listening. May whatever's been helpful drop down and seed in our being. Whatever wasn't, may it wash off. May whatever is helpful contribute to the deep healing of each of us.